When we last left off in Galatians, we were reading about the freedom that comes by the gospel. Paul said, you were called to freedom. And that freedom is freedom from the law, but also freedom from all of its consequences, all of the curses that are promised when they say, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. We don't have to worry about any of that because we have been freed from the law and from its consequences. But someone might hear that and wonder how that affects or doesn't affect our conduct. Like we can just confess that we believe, but then live in a way that's contrary to the gospel, live in a way that doesn't have any kind of repentance or, as we'll put it, good fruit. And so Paul addresses that, saying, don't use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. And we talked about how the gospel fulfills the requirement of righteousness in us. Not only does it make us right with God, but it also makes us live in a way that's consistent with God's holiness. He is separated from the world. He doesn't live like the world, and so neither do we. That's what the gospel does for us. And it does it. See, the law tells us what we should be. The law tells us what we must be. But the gospel changes who we are. It doesn't just say do or die. The gospel gives us a new heart. It changes our desires. It changes the things that we want and the way that we act and the things that we do. And so all of this we can say real easily is by faith. And if it's by faith, it's of the Spirit. And that's what we read about last time. Walk by the Spirit. And that's not some special emotion. It's not some extra level of dedication. It's plain and simple. I'm like Abraham. He tried to have a child by his flesh. When that didn't work, he just believed the promise. Well, you could say that's the same thing as walking by the Spirit. To just believe. How are you trying to find the righteousness of the law? Well, not through works, but instead through the Spirit. And when we do it that way, we're trusting in God, and so we bear His fruit. We talked about that fruit. The fruit of the Spirit is, if you'll remember, this is Galatians 5, I think verse 22. It's love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Now I want to go back to the last verse of chapter 5. And I want to read, we're going to start right there, keeping in mind this fruit. That this fruit sets the context for everything that comes in chapter 6. He's been giving us these illustrations. He's given us this illustration of the fruit. Well, now he's going to get very specific in how that looks as we deal with each other. And it's within the context of the problems that were going on in Galatia. Verse 26. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. So it's likely that what happened there in Galatia, and you'll see this as we read through the whole rest of chapter 6, it's very likely that they had kind of broken into these little groups. You had one set of people over here who believed that they were more spiritual. They believed that they were more learned. And yet this other group of people who were just a little bit different in their way of thinking. And he's not saying that one group is Christians and the other group isn't. He's not saying this isn't the same thing as the situation in Corinth where you had the young man who had taken his father's wife, his stepmother. It's not like that. It's way more subtle than that. Now I want you to think about this because it's something that can happen in a church that cares about doctrine. Where you have some group that says, well, we believe this. And then you have another group that says, we believe this. And so there's this division, this little rift, that it might not be so apparent, but you have this problem where the people are split, and one group considers themselves more dedicated than the other group. One considers themselves more spiritual than the other group. And Paul says, look, there is absolutely no room for that in a church. There's no room for rifts or for division because, those kinds of things he's already said are the works of the flesh. Look back there at the works of the flesh. What does he say about those things? Just some of them that apply immediately to this. The works of the flesh are obvious. Enmity is one. You've got a little bit of problem, a little bit of hatred for your brother. Or for anyone. You have enmity. There's a war going on between you. Folks, that has no place inside of a church at all. You can't say that this is the fruit of the Spirit. You can't call yourself a spiritual person and then walk like that. Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy. There's no room for any of that stuff. And so instead he says, let us be full of love. And he says, let us not be conceited. Let's not be self-centered here. Let's not be focused on what we want necessarily, because we're led by the Spirit. And it's already been said that the flesh and the Spirit want two very different things. They're opposed to each other. If you are a spiritual person, if you are a Christ-like person, these works of the flesh aren't going to be your defining characteristics. Not even over little subtle things. To provoke each other. And to make each other envious and to become envious of each other is the very opposite of what love is. It's the very opposite of the gospel, in fact. Remember what he told the Corinthians when he wrote to them? What was one of the things he said about love? This is from 13:4. Love does not envy or boast, and it is not arrogant. Love does not envy. It doesn't look at someone else and want what they have. It does not boast. It doesn't talk about how great I am. It's not arrogant. It doesn't consider other people as less important. He told the Philippians to do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. Don't do anything because it's only good for you. But in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Now just stop and think about what that means for a second. Can you say that you consider the needs and wants of the other people in this room as more significant than your own? He says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition or conceit. But see, we're one body. And that's the illustration he gives in another place. The hand doesn't say to the foot, we don't need you. No part of the body says you're less important. We don't care about you. It's one body. And he says that's how we're supposed to think of ourselves. We are one functioning body. And the things that might not be as presented, might not seem as important, are no less important. So don't be conceited. Do nothing from selfish ambition, but in humility count others as more significant than yourselves. I know that's a tall order. That's a lot to ask, isn't it? But think about the example that we've been shown. In that same section in Philippians, he goes on to describe the attitude of Jesus. He says, let your attitude be just like the attitude Jesus had. And what did Jesus do? He made himself of no reputation. He lowered himself. Think about what that means. Here is the Son of God, by whom all things were created, and in him they live and move and have their being. Think about what that means. That means you're not even breathing today except for Jesus. You have nothing except for him. And you offended him. We all like sheep have gone astray, each of us according to his own way. He has absolutely no reason to come and help you. But he made himself of no reputation. He lowered himself to the form of a servant, to a man. He came down here and he washed his disciples' feet to prove his point. He who is first is last. The greatest is the least. I'm laying down my life for you, not because I owe your debt, but because I love you. And so when Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition, do nothing out of conceit, but in humility consider the needs of others as more significant than your own, he's not just pulling that out of the air. We have a biblical example. We have an example from God himself. He considered our needs as more important than his own. He considered us before himself, and he gave his life on our behalf. So no one, as he says to the Romans, should think more highly of himself than he ought. But the thing is, this is the principle, this is the command here. Don't be like this, but be like this. But no one's going to be perfect, right? Because we can hear that all day long, and the fact is that none of us will ever always consider other people as more significant than ourselves. There will be things that happen. Just like in a marriage. People talk about a perfect marriage. There's no such thing as that, is there? The only thing that makes a marriage great is that both people love each other and are committed to each other and stay in that, not necessarily the passion of love, but the commitment of love, the humility of love. Well, that's the same thing that happens in a church. We're going to get offended at each other. That happens, doesn't it? There are going to be things that other people do that we don't like. But the thing is, and I'm not looking for a perfect place. I'm looking for a place where people love me and where I can love other people. That's what this body is. And so, Paul, knowing that those problems are going to come up, he starts in chapter 6, verse 1. He says, brothers, it's a good word to start with because you're family. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. If anyone is caught in any transgression, it doesn't mean like if you kick the door in and catch someone doing something wrong. That's not what it means. To be caught in this transgression is like a trap. If anyone is taken by surprise, is what he's saying. These aren't blatant sins. We're not talking about the guy with his mother or with his stepmother. These are little subtle things that are kind of hard to see. Talking about things that people might not realize that they're doing. It's a thing that you could look at it from a distance and say, that's actually good. We're talking specifically in Galatians about this problem where people are saying, well, you need to be circumcised. You need to keep the law. You need to live in a certain way that shows the morality, right? That's not a bad thing, is it? Well, it was, and we've talked about why. But you've got these two groups, and one thinks it's more religious than the other. One thinks that it's more spiritual than the other, and so it causes this rift. And Paul doesn't say those people don't believe in Christ. He says if you go with that, Christ is of no value to you. He's trying to talk them out of it. He would say about them, well, they've been caught in this transgression. They've been taken by surprise by this thing. They don't realize what's happening. But his solution wasn't to be mean to them. It wasn't to kick them out of the church. It wasn't to cut them off. He said, I wish the Judaizers who are causing this problem would cut themselves off from all of you. Even you who have believed what they've said. I wish they would leave you alone so that you could see the gospel as it is. His intention was to restore them. If there is anyone caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him. It's not hard to find similar problems like that in churches today, is it? That's something that still exists, especially in churches that care about doctrine. I was a member of a Facebook group that is dedicated to New Covenant theology. And that's New Covenant theology. That's a great thing. They say, hey, we're dead to the law. We believe in the New Covenant. And then you start listening to the things that they talk about, and then they get into this argument over the law of Christ. And I would have expected gentleness, fruit of the Spirit. But instead it was like, metaphorically, they drew swords on each other, and they took sides, and they started fighting, and it got disgusting. Because first and foremost, the disciples are known by our love for each other. And so how can you say ugly things about someone who has we're not talking about gospel issue things. We're just talking about things they're kind of hard to understand. It's not so blatant. It's a little bit subtle, and these people are saying some of the ugliest things about each other. Well, that's not the fruit of the Spirit. And it's an online version. That was an online version of things that happen in churches all the time. We have to know about this so we can guard ourselves against it. It's more than just gossip. What I mean when I say it's subtle, it's more than just gossip. It's when you gossip about someone, you know what you're doing, you know that it's wrong, it's bad. But these things are couched in religious terms, in doctrinal terms. It's taking a stand for the truth. Now, I think about Jesus getting his whip and turning over those tables and driving those people out. I think about Paul saying, do I need to come back with the whip? There is a time and a place, but what we're talking about specifically here in Galatians is a bunch of brothers who had this problem come up between them. And some group was looking down on the other group. Paul says, this cannot be happening in this church. You need to understand what the truth is, and you need to help each other understand what the truth is. And you have to do it from the motivation of love as a family, and you have to do it with a spirit of gentleness. The purpose is to restore. The purpose is to restore is to get them back on track. It's not to embarrass someone. It's not to have power. It's not to abuse. It's not to drive them out. The thing is that the transgression, when there is a transgression, it's pointed out gently. You should think about this. It's pointed out in love because you care about not only about the person himself, but you care about all the people who are around him. We care about actually resolving it in a helpful way. And you know that a soft answer, what does a soft answer do? Turns away wrath. That's right, a soft answer will turn away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. If you come to your brother and you poke him in the chest and you're an idiot. How can you believe that? That's not going to help him. That's not going to help you. That's where we get dissension. Those are the works of the flesh. But if you love your brother, just think about this. How would you treat your wife or your husband? How would you treat your child? You wouldn't treat them that way because you love them. And so you would help. The purpose is not to drive them down. The purpose is to lift them up. I want to help you. And don't forget that this is all within the context of spiritual fruit. The works of the flesh are one thing. Enmity and strife and jealousy and divisions. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. The fruit of the Spirit is peace and patience and kindness and goodness. These spiritual people know the gospel. Those folks in Galatia know the gospel. They have experienced it firsthand. And so you know what? There is no reason that they shouldn't be able to show the same fruit that's been given to them. They should be able to help their brother in a spirit of gentleness. But those who do the restoring, brothers, if you know somebody who's caught in this transgression, restore him in a spirit of gentleness. But the rest of verse 1, keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. But the thing is, if anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor, for each will have to bear his own load. The concern is here that those who are spiritual are in a little bit of danger of falling into the same trap as the transgressor, because they're comparing themselves against the transgressor. The transgressor is kind of looking down on the other people, and they say, hey, restore them, but watch yourselves. Yes, you need to bear the burden with each other, but don't fall into the same trap. And like I said, we don't really know what was going on. Maybe it was some kind of rift. It surely made immediate sense to them. Maybe on one side you've got this group who wants the circumcision. On the other side you've got the group that just wants grace. And maybe the fruits of the flesh are starting to show a little bit. And there's some pride there. And there needs to be more fruit of the Spirit. And there is this need to point out sin. There is a need to point out the transgression. The leaving of the path. But you've got to watch how you do it. And so he warns them and he says, keep watch on yourself lest you too be tempted. Examine yourself so you don't fall into the same trap. Maybe you look at someone and you think to yourself, man, I sure am glad I'm not that way. Have you ever had that thought? I'm thankful for what I've been able to do with the grace that was given to me. I'm glad that I'm so much better at understanding doctrine and so much better at exercising the fruits of the Spirit than that person over there. You know who that sounds like? Sounds like the Pharisee. It sounds just like that Pharisee who said, thank you, God, that I'm not like this tax collector. Thank you that I'm not like that sinner over there, that I'm so much better. Well, that's conceit, is it not? That's pride. And you've fallen into the exact same trap that you're supposed to be helping with. And Paul basically says, don't think that God is pleased with you because of what you've been able to do with grace. Don't think that God is pleased with you because you're so much better. Your confidence needs to remain in what God has done for you, and that's all. And if you can keep that mentality, but for the grace of God, there go I, right? I would be right there where you are, so I'm not coming to you in pride telling you how you need to live your life. This is what the gospel says, and both of us are to believe it. And because I care about you, I want you to hear the gospel. Not my preference, not because I'm better, because this is the gospel. We are nothing without God. So, when we point out this kind of sin, when we talk about these kinds of things, it's because we want to help each other, which fulfills the law of Christ. That is, helping each other is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We help each other with our physical needs, right? If someone has a need, we see that someone's hungry or someone's thirsty or cold, we take care of that. We also do it for our spiritual needs. We tell each other about the truth and we talk about the truth and we keep it lifted up in front of us. And if you think about it, if you think about how we are supposed to address sin with each other, it's not hard to see how that's exactly what Christ did for us, isn't it? This is exactly what Christ did. We were the transgressors. He is the one who is spiritual. And so you can just see how this example, Paul says, look, you Galatians, you've got this problem where someone is transgressing, full of pride, and you got this other group, the spiritual group, and they're coming over here and they're trying to help them. They're going to do it gently. Well, that's really exactly what Christ did. We were the transgressors. We were the people who were caught in a sin that we didn't know anything about. And Christ was the one who came to us because of his love for us, because of his concern for us. And he bore our burden. He took up that load and helped us carry it. He carried it for us. And how did he do it? He wasn't rolling his eyes or shaking his head. He didn't go and gossip about how terrible it is, how hard people are to deal with. He did it in all humility. He humbled himself. He took on the form of a servant. He put himself in our place. He did it all because he loves us. This is the gospel. This is all the gospel is. This is the whole thing. That Jesus Christ has loved us enough that He gave Himself for us. And I'm telling you, if you believe that, if you believe that now and you've never believed it before, you are saved right now. Believe that gospel. You believe that a long time, it's still the gospel. And it's the gospel that changes who you are and makes you live according to the righteousness of God. Brothers, if you know anyone in any kind of transgression, help him carry that burden. Do it in gentleness and do it out of love. This is the fruit of the Spirit.